He gave food to a homeless boy, and the cameras caught everything. The next day he was fired. But when he found the notebook, everything changed. In today's video, we'll explore a story that starts with a heartfelt act of kindness, but quickly spirals into an emotional journey filled with unexpected twists. How does one simple gesture lead to losing everything? And what could possibly be hidden in a forgotten notebook that could turn a life upside down? You'll see how one moment of compassion sparks a series of events no one could predict. Stay with us until the end to uncover every detail of this powerful and unforgettable story. The unmistakable smell of fresh herbs, grilled meat, and caramelized garlic still lingered in the air as Peter Donovan closed the Grove, a trendy spot in the heart of Williamsburg, Brooklyn. The lights from the surrounding buildings reflected in the puddles on the sidewalk, casting an almost magical glow on the rainy night. He moved with precision, wiping down the marble counters with the same care he put into his dishes. Despite the success and prestige, Peter felt a weight that no Michelin star could alleviate. Outside, near the main window, he noticed something he had seen before: a boy. Small, skinny, wearing a coat too big for his frame, with eyes fixed on the restaurant's interior. This time, Peter hesitated before continuing his tasks. He tried to ignore it, but the expression on the boy's face troubled him, a mix of hunger and shame. After a few minutes of observation, Peter made an impulsive decision. He glanced around to ensure his team had already left. He grabbed a plate that had been left over from a canceled order: roast chicken, truffle mashed potatoes, and a small artisan bread. He crossed the kitchen and carefully pushed the emergency exit door, stepping directly into the alley where the boy was leaning against the wall. "Hey, kid," he called softly, trying not to startle him. The boy looked up, wary. "Are you hungry?" Peter extended the plate. The boy hesitated, but his eyes betrayed his hunger. He took the plate, murmuring a shy "thank you" before sitting on the ground. Peter watched for a moment. The boy ate slowly, as if he wanted to savor every bite. Unbeknownst to Peter, the security camera in the alley captured every moment. The gesture seemed simple, but it was the beginning of something much larger. 2 days later, Peter found himself in the midst of a packed dinner service. Elegant customers conversed in hushed tones while waitstaff moved swiftly. The polished atmosphere concealed the storm that was about to break. A distinct notification sound echoed from his assistant Claudia's phone. She frowned and called Peter into the office, showing him the video that was going viral. The recording, automatically made by the security camera installed in the alley for nighttime delivery protection, had been downloaded by a morning shift employee who was moved by Peter's gesture. Without thinking much about the implications, he shared the video in a small online group. Within hours, it escaped the group and began circulating on social media, shared by popular accounts that quickly made it go viral. The video from the alley was simple yet powerful. The title grabbed attention: "Renowned Chef Feeds Homeless Child in Act of Generosity." The images showed Peter with the plate, handing it to the boy. In the comments, people praised his kindness, but discussions quickly ensued. Some questioned whether he was promoting charity for self-promotion. Peter rubbed the back of his neck, trying to hide his irritation. "It wasn't planned, Claudia. It was just human." "I know," she replied, concerned, "but the investors won't see it that way." She was right. Within hours, the restaurant's management called for an emergency meeting. While waiting for the video conference to start, Peter watched the video reach over 500,000 views. He didn't know whether to feel proud or fear what was to come. When the meeting began, one of the main investors, Franklin Rowe, wasted no time with pleasantries. "Peter, you know we appreciate your creativity and leadership, but this?" He pointed at the screen where the video was paused. "This isn't professional. It violates health protocols and could harm the restaurant's image." "I did this off the clock. I didn't involve the restaurant at all," Peter defended himself. "You are the face of Grove. Everything you do involves us," Franklin shot back. "And honestly, this isn't good for business." His words hit Peter like a knife. He looked at the other investors on the call, searching for support. The silence was deafening. The next morning, Peter received an email that seemed to seal his fate. The message, brief and impersonal, informed him that he had been removed from his position as executive chef and creative director of Grove. He walked through Brooklyn Bridge Park, trying to process what had just happened. The cold breeze carried the scent of the East River, but he could barely notice. The restaurant, his masterpiece, had been taken from him for something he believed to be the right thing to do. That same night, while heading home, he spotted the boy again, in the same spot near the restaurant. This time he was without a coat and looked even more vulnerable. Peter paused and watched for a few seconds before approaching. "Hey, what are you doing here again?" he asked, sitting beside the boy. The boy looked at him surprised. "I just stay here, it's quiet." "Do you have somewhere to sleep?" The boy hesitated before answering. "Sometimes, sometimes not." Peter took a deep breath. "My name is Peter. What's yours?" "Javier." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Javier seemed uncomfortable, but Peter decided not to press him. Looking at the boy, something inside Peter shifted. He realized he had lost the restaurant, but maybe there was something bigger to be done. Peter pulled out his wallet, and instead of offering money, he handed over a card for a friend who ran a local shelter. "If you want help, go there. Tell them I sent you." Javier took the card but didn't say anything. As Peter walked away, he heard the boy murmur, "Thank you." The gesture seemed simple, but within Peter, a new resolve began to grow. He didn't know how, but he would do something meaningful with this. What he still didn't realize was that this decision would lead him down a path that would change his life, and Javier's, forever. What Peter still didn't know was that his simple gesture would attract much more than he could foresee. Javier, on the other hand, held secrets that would explain much about his hesitation and resistance to help. But how would these two very different lives intersect in a definitive way? The streets of Brooklyn were even more bustling that cold morning. Peter walked aimlessly down Bedford Avenue, his hands buried in the pockets of his worn leather jacket. The echo of his boots against the wet pavement seemed louder than the noise around him. He didn't know what hurt more, losing his job or the flood of messages from acquaintances, some offering support while others accused him of being reckless. As he passed a small park, his eyes landed on a nearby bench. Javier was there, curled up under a patched coat. The boy stared intently at a group of pigeons but didn't seem interested in scaring them away. Peter hesitated. After their encounter the night before, he wasn't sure if it was the right time to approach, but the solitary expression on Javier's face made him change his mind. "Do you like pigeons?" Peter asked, trying to sound casual as he sat down beside him. Javier glanced at him briefly, not responding, then turned back to watch the birds. Peter pulled a bag of peanuts from his pocket and offered it. "They love this." Javier looked at the bag but didn't extend his hand. "It's not good to feed them like that," he murmured. "Why not?" "Because they come back, always." Peter laughed, but there was something in the boy's tone that made him stop. "Have you always been around here? I mean, in this park?" Javier shrugged. "Sometimes there's not many places to go." Peter couldn't help himself. "And your parents? Is there someone you can reach out to?" Javier's reaction was immediate. He stood up from the bench, grabbing a battered backpack that was next to him. "Why do you want to know? You're not my dad." Peter raised his hands, trying to calm the boy. "I'm just asking because I care, Javier." The boy paused, his shoulders tense, but didn't respond. The frustration and pain in Javier's eyes were evident, but Peter realized that pressing further might drive him away even more. He let the boy go, but not before noticing something dangling from his backpack, a small keychain in the shape of a star with the name Maria engraved on it. Hours later, Peter returned to the park, determined to try again. He carried 2 coffees and a bag of cookies, but when he arrived at the bench, Javier was no longer there. He walked around the block, searching, until he spotted him sitting on the steps of an abandoned building near Marcy Avenue. "You're persistent," Javier said, without looking at him as Peter climbed the steps and sat down beside him. "Or stubborn." Peter extended one of the coffees. "No milk, did I guess right?" Javier hesitated but accepted it. "What do you want from me? You've done what you wanted, right? You gave me food and now you have a hero video on the internet." The remark cut Peter like a blade. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "You think I did this to get attention? That's not it, Javier." "It doesn't matter. Now everyone knows who you are. And me? I'm just the boy from the video." Javier set the coffee aside, irritated. People only help because it makes them feel better. Peter fell silent, digesting those words. He knew Javier was hurt, but the boy's tone also carried a weight of truth that he wasn't ready to confront. Perhaps in some way, he also wanted to validate his own actions. "You're right," he finally admitted. "I don't know what it's like to be in your position. I don't know what it's like to lose everything." "You don't?" Javier stood up, but this time Peter didn't try to stop him. He just watched as the boy disappeared between the buildings. That night, Javier's words echoed in Peter's mind. For the first time, he began to question his motivations. Did he really want to help the boy, or was he trying to alleviate his own guilt from a privileged life? The next day, Peter returned to the park. The bench where he had found Javier was empty, but on the ground nearby, he spotted something forgotten: a blue notebook with a slightly worn cover. He picked it up, flipping through the pages. Each sheet was filled with detailed drawings done in ordinary pencil, yet showing impressive precision. The sketches depicted tall buildings, bridges, and squares that Peter immediately recognized as parts of Brooklyn. Others were designs for structures that clearly didn't yet exist but looked incredibly real. Among the drawings, a small note in the corner of a page caught his attention. "For Maria, who always believed." Peter felt a tightness in his chest. It wasn't just the boy's talent that impressed him. It was what those drawings represented: hope. Despite everything, Javier still had a dream. And that keychain, Maria must be someone important. He tucked the notebook away and left, feeling determined. He didn't know exactly how, but he would do something to help Javier. Not because he needed to or wanted to redeem himself, but because the boy deserved it. In the distance, Peter spotted Javier standing on the corner, watching the traffic. He wanted to run to him, but something made him hesitate. Javier wasn't just a street kid. He was someone with a story that Peter still didn't know, and perhaps that was more complicated than he had imagined. What did Javier's drawings really mean? Who was Maria, and what was her connection to the boy? Peter knew that helping Javier would be a greater challenge than he had anticipated, but how far was he willing to go to change the boy's fate?
If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and leave a comment with your thoughts. It really helps the channel grow and keeps us motivated to share more incredible stories. Now, let's continue with the next chapter.
Javier looked at the card Peter had given him and, after hours of hesitation, finally followed the address to a community shelter in East Williamsburg. There, he was welcomed by volunteers who treated him kindly, offering him clean clothes, a warm meal, and a place to shower. For the first time in weeks, Javier saw his clean reflection in the mirror. He felt a bit strange, as if the person staring back at him wasn't quite himself, but he decided to ignore the discomfort. He was preparing for what seemed like his first real opportunity to change his life. The next morning, Peter stood in front of the small space he had rented at the corner of Bedford Avenue and North 5th Street. It was nothing more than a sidewalk stall with an old counter and a faded blue awning, but he saw a new chance there. With what little savings he had left, he bought a small portable stove, basic ingredients, and a manual cash register. There was no luxury, but what he lacked in resources, he promised to make up for in dedication. That same afternoon, he found Javier near the park where the boy used to hang out. Javier was sitting on the ground, drawing on a torn piece of paper. This time he looked different, cleaner, wearing a simple shirt and pants that weren't torn. Peter smiled. pleased to see that the shelter had been a good starting point. "Hey, Javier, I need your help with something," he said, breaking the silence. Javier looked at him skeptically. "Help with what?" "Food. I'm starting a food stand and I need someone smart enough to help me. I thought of you." The boy scoffed, not putting down his pencil. "Why me? I don't know how to cook." "I don't need a chef, just someone who can count change and isn't afraid to talk to people." "I'm not good with people," Javier murmured. Peter crouched down to meet his gaze. "Neither am I, but sometimes we have to do what's necessary." Javier hesitated. He wanted to refuse, but there was something in Peter's tone that made him reconsider. Besides, he couldn't ignore the hunger he felt almost every day. "Okay, I can try," he finally said. The next morning, they got an early start. Peter chopped vegetables and prepared burgers while explaining to Javier how to use the cash register. "Look, it's not complicated. You just need to press here and here. But if you make a mistake, it's fine. We'll fix it." Javier seemed nervous, but there was a determination in his eyes. During the first customers, he avoided making direct eye contact, but Peter noticed small improvements. By the end of the morning, they had sold enough to cover costs and even set aside some profit. As they were packing up the stand, Peter saw Javier smile for the first time. It was a shy smile, but genuine. "That wasn't so bad," the boy admitted. "It really wasn't," Peter replied, feeling that for the first time in weeks, he was doing something right. Days turned into weeks, and the stand began to gain attention. Its location near the park and subway made it a strategic spot, and people started returning for the quality of the food and Javier's growing friendliness, who was slowly coming out of his shell. One afternoon, while Javier was organizing the change, a woman approached with her phone in hand. "You're the chef from the video, aren't you?" she asked, pointing at Peter. Peter froze for a moment but then nodded. "Yes, that's me." "I knew it. My husband saw the video and talked about you. He thought it was amazing what you did for the boy. Is this the kid?" she asked, looking at Javier. Javier lowered his eyes, uncomfortable. "Yeah, it's him," Peter replied, not noticing the tension in the boy. The woman smiled. "What an incredible story. Good luck with the stand." As she walked away, Peter noticed that Javier was rigid, gripping the change tightly. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Why did you tell her?" Javier replied through clenched teeth. "She was just curious, Javier. It's not a big deal." "It's nothing to you. To me, it feels like I'm a trophy, a cute little story for these people to feel better." Peter fell silent, unsure how to respond. He understood Javier's point, but didn't know how to convince the boy that his intentions were sincere. Despite the discomfort, the stand continued to grow. Regular customers began referring to Javier by name, asking about him and praising his dedication. For the first time in a long while, Javier felt like he had a place in the world. "Hey, Peter," Javier said one night while they were packing up, "I think you were right. Maybe I am good with people." "You're more than good, Javier," Peter replied proudly. "You're amazing." The next morning, the routine seemed to follow as usual. Peter was preparing the ingredients while Javier organized the change and cleaned the counter. The crowd was starting to pick up, and they were gearing up for another busy day. Then it happened. Javier, distracted while serving a customer, spilled a cup of hot oil on the ground. The liquid quickly flowed to the side of the stand where the gas tank was. In seconds, a small flame began to form. "Fire!" Peter shouted, dropping everything to grab the extinguisher. Customers quickly retreated while Peter and Javier tried to contain the fire. After a few minutes of panic, Peter managed to put out the flames. The damage wasn't severe, but the stand was singed and some equipment was destroyed. Peter looked at Javier, who was frozen, pale. "It's okay, kid. No one got hurt," Peter said, trying to reassure him. "It was my fault," Javier mumbled. "It wasn't anyone's fault. Accidents happen," Peter replied, but Javier shook his head, refusing to accept it. Without saying anything more, Javier grabbed his backpack and began to walk away. "Javier, wait!" Peter shouted, but the boy didn't stop. That night, Peter found something left behind at the stand: Javier's sketchbook. On the first page, there was a new drawing, different from the others. It was a drawing of the two of them smiling next to the stand with a phrase written in small letters in the corner: "Thank you for believing." Peter held the sketchbook tightly, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. He knew that Javier was running away not because he wanted to, but because he was still battling his own demons. What truly led Javier to disappear? And how would Peter use the sketchbook to find the boy again? Would this escape reflect something deeper in Javier's past? The fine rain covered the streets of Brooklyn as Peter walked, clutching Javier's sketchbook tightly. It was all that remained of the boy who had transformed his life in such a short time. He passed by *** Bedford Avenue ***, looking at every corner, every alley. The park where they used to talk was empty, with only an old man feeding pigeons. He tried to remember the places Javier had mentioned during their brief conversations, but nothing felt concrete. In the small cafes around the area, Peter showed the sketchbook, describing the boy, but the response was always the same: "I'm sorry, I haven't seen him." Exhausted and aimless, Peter decided to go to the community shelter where Javier had taken a shower before starting to work at the stand. There, he was greeted by Denise, the coordinator, who clearly remembered the boy. "He always talked about a Maria," said Denise, shuffling through papers as she tried to help Peter. "I don't know who she is, but he seemed lost when he spoke about her, like he carried some guilt." Peter frowned. He had seen that name before, written on the keychain hanging from Javier's backpack and scribbled in one of the corners of the sketchbook. "Maria. Do you think she's someone important to him?" Denise shrugged. "Maybe it could be someone he lost or is trying to find. Kids like him carry stories that we often can't understand." Peter left the shelter with more questions than answers. Who was Maria? Why did that name appear so often? As he walked, the rain began to pour harder, and he felt the weight of solitude. Javier wasn't just a boy. He was the bridge to something larger that Peter still couldn't comprehend. After an entire day of fruitless searches, Peter turned to something more organized. He began calling NGOs that worked with homeless children. That's how he met Lila Moreno, the leader of a child welfare program in Brooklyn. When he arrived at Lila's office, Peter looked visibly worn out. Lila, a tall woman with a firm posture, greeted him with a curious look. "You seem determined," she said, indicating that he should sit. Peter opened Javier's sketchbook to a page with one of the most detailed drawings. A tall building with almost architectural lines. In the bottom corner, he pointed out the scribble of the name Maria. "This boy, he's disappeared. I just want to find him." Lila examined the drawing and the name before responding. "These strokes, he has talent, but this name here, Maria, seems important. Has he talked about her with you?" "Not directly," Peter admitted, "but I've seen that name before. It's on a keychain he carries, and it seems to be everywhere in the drawings." "That could be a clue. It might be a family figure or someone he feels he needs to find." Lila continued to observe the sketchbook. "But Peter, do you know how many children disappear or roam around every day? Many of them don't want to be found." "He isn't running away from me," Peter insisted. "He thinks he's a burden, that he doesn't deserve help, but he's just a boy." Lila watched him for a moment before opening a file on her computer. "Kids like him often carry more than we can imagine. Traumas, guilt, sometimes something or someone they believe they need to find." She typed quickly. "Let's do this. I have contacts in other cities. We can check where he might have gone, but this may take time." "I won't give up," Peter declared. Lila smiled, slightly impressed. "You're willing to go wherever it takes, aren't you?" "Anywhere," Peter replied without hesitation. 2 days later, Peter was in the kitchen of the stand, trying to focus on something productive while waiting for news from Lila. He nearly dropped his phone when he saw her number flashing on the screen. "Lila," he answered, his voice heavy with anticipation. "I have a lead," she said straightforwardly. A shelter in the Bronx reported the arrival of a boy that matches Javier's description, but he didn't stay long. "Are you sure it was him?" Peter held the phone tightly. "The shelter staff mentioned something peculiar. The boy asked for a woman named Maria Santiago. Does that confirm anything for you?" Peter felt a chill. The name wasn't just a coincidence. He knew Javier held that Maria in deep regard, but why? Yes, it confirms he's looking for her. "The Bronx is big," Lila continued cautiously, "but we can start there. I'll pass you the address of the shelter. Maybe they know more." After hanging up, Peter looked at Javier's sketchbook, which lay on the table. He opened it to a page with a drawing of a building he didn't recognize. In the corner, there was a signature, Javier Santiago. The last name was the same as Lila had mentioned. Maria Santiago wasn't just an arbitrary name. She was the key to understanding what was happening with Javier. But why had he never mentioned it directly? Peter knew that the search for Javier now had two parts, finding him and discovering who Maria was. All he was certain of was that wherever Javier was, he was seeking answers. Who is Maria Santiago? And what is her connection to Javier? Why had he never talked about her directly with Peter? As the search for the boy continues, Peter feels he is merely scratching the surface of a much deeper and more complicated story. Peter adjusted the awning of the stall while observing the bustle around him. It had been weeks since he last heard from Javier, but giving up was never an option. He looked at the fresh ingredients he had just purchased, promising himself that he would use every cent he earned for something meaningful. If Javier couldn't be there, Peter would transform the space into something that honored the boy's story and helped others like him. With the profits he accumulated, Peter expanded the small business. He bought simple wooden tables and set up a covered area next to the stall. More than just a point of sale, that place was beginning to become a refuge. He offered free meals to those in need and created a space where vulnerable youths could work in exchange for food, clean clothes, and even a little money. The first young person he hired was Devin, a 16-year-old boy who lived in a nearby shelter. Devin was shy, but gradually he began to open up, learning to serve customers and even help in the kitchen. "Do you think I can really learn to cook?" he asked one day while stirring the tomato sauce. "Of course you can. Cooking is like telling a story," Peter replied with an encouraging smile. "And you have a lot of good stories to tell." People began to notice. Regular customers made donations, leaving extra cash or bringing clothes and supplies. The stall became a symbol of hope in the neighborhood, something Peter had never imagined. But even with the growing success, he couldn't shake thoughts of Javier. Every night he flipped through the notebook left by the boy, searching for answers in the drawings. "Javier, where are you?" he whispered to himself as he tucked the notebook away in a drawer. One busy morning, Peter noticed a woman with an NBC News badge approaching the stall. She was wearing a formal dress and holding a microphone, accompanied by a cameraman. "Peter Donovan?" she called out while he was cleaning the counter. "Yes, that's me," he replied cautiously. "My name is Kara Whitman. We're doing a piece on community initiatives that are transforming lives, and we've heard about your work here." Peter hesitated. He knew the impact a report could have, but he also feared the exposure. Still, he thought that this could help spread the message and perhaps reach Javier in some way. "Sure, I can talk to you." The interview began with simple questions about how the stall had grown and what motivated him to help young people. "I just want to give them a chance that many don't have," he said, holding a plate he had just prepared. "Everyone deserves to be seen and heard." Kara smiled, impressed. "And where did that inspiration come from? You mentioned someone named Javier." Peter paused for a moment, memories flooding back. Javier was the beginning of everything. He's a brilliant boy, full of talent, but for some reason he felt he didn't deserve help. He disappeared, and since then, I've been trying to do something he would be proud of. The crew captured footage of the stall and the small team of youths working alongside Peter. When the interview ended, Kara shook his hand. "You're changing lives, Peter. This story will inspire many people. The segment aired that night and quickly gained traction online. People shared the video with emotional comments, praising Peter and the impact he was making. But among the thousands of views, something unexpected happened. An NGO in the Bronx reached out after recognizing Javier in the original footage, triggering a new wave of hope. As Peter read the email he received from the NGO, he felt his heart race. "We have information about the boy mentioned," the message said. "Please contact us for more details." Peter immediately picked up the phone and called the number provided by the NGO. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "Thank you for reaching out," said the social worker. "My name is Clara. We have a boy in our system who matches Javier's description. He's in one of our shelters in the Bronx." Peter felt his heart race. "Is he okay? Did he mention why he left?" "Yes, he's doing well," Clara replied. "But he seems to carry a lot of emotional weight. He doesn't like to talk about why he ran away, and he's very reserved. What caught our attention were the drawings. Javier draws constantly, and his work has impressed everyone here." Peter took a deep breath. "That sounds exactly like him. And what about Maria Santiago? Did he mention that name before?" Clara paused before responding. "Yes, he did. He asked us if we knew anyone by that name. We think she might be a sister or someone important to him. When he spoke of her, he seemed hopeful but also very distressed." The name Maria Santiago was already etched in Peter's mind, but hearing it from Clara reinforced the importance of that person in Javier's life. He realized there were more layers to the boy's story than he had ever imagined. "Can I go see him?" Peter asked, his voice heavy with urgency. "Of course," Clara said, "but I'll need to talk to Javier first. He has difficulty trusting people, and we want to make sure he feels comfortable. He's still very closed off." "I understand," Peter replied. "Just tell him I'm here to help, that he can trust me." After hanging up, Peter sat in the small space behind the stall, holding Javier's notebook once more. He opened it to a page with an unfinished drawing of a building. In the corner was scribbled the name Maria Santiago. "Javier," he whispered to himself. "Who is she? Why didn't you ever tell me directly? And how can I help you now?" Deep down, he knew that finding Javier at the shelter was just the beginning. The real question was, would the boy be ready to face whatever was hidden in his past? Peter stepped off the train at the 149th Street Grand Concourse station in the Bronx. The city felt even more chaotic and loud than he remembered. With the address of the shelter scribbled on a piece of paper, he walked quickly through the narrow, bustling streets. Each step was laden with anxiety, a mix of hope and fear about what he would find upon arrival. The shelter was an old brick building with a simple sign that read, "House of Hope, Shelter for Youth." Peter entered, inhaling the smell of freshly cooked food mingled with the sounds of children playing in a nearby hall. He was greeted by Clara, the social worker he had spoken with over the phone. She was a middle-aged woman with her hair tied back in a tight bun and eyes that conveyed fatigue but also genuine compassion. "You must be Peter, right?" she asked, extending her hand. "Yes," he replied, shaking it firmly. "Is Javier here?" Clara nodded. "He's in the recreation room, drawing, but I want you to know that he's still adjusting. Be mindful of what you say. He's sensitive to certain topics." Peter simply nodded. Clara led him down the hallway to an ajar door. When he peeked inside, he saw Javier sitting at a low table, surrounded by colored pencils and sheets of paper. The boy was focused, his brow furrowed as he worked on an intricate sketch. Peter took a deep breath before entering. "Hey, Javier," he said softly. The boy looked up quickly, surprised but not putting down the pencil. "You came all the way here?" he asked, distrust evident in his tone. "You left me no choice," Peter replied, pulling the notebook from the bag he carried. He placed it on the table. "I brought this. I thought you might want it back." Javier looked at the notebook, hesitant. It was clear he was happy to see him, but he was also wrestling with the urge to trust completely. "You left this behind," Peter continued, "and you know it's important, not just for you, but for me too." The boy averted his gaze, muttering something Peter couldn't quite hear. He knew he would need to be patient. Javier picked up the notebook, but he didn't open it right away. He held it in his hands, fingers tracing the cover as if it were a fragile object. Finally, he murmured, "I thought you'd be better off without me." Peter frowned, sitting down next to the boy. "What made you think that? You were never a burden, Javier." I messed up," he replied, still avoiding eye contact. "In the tent, with the accident. If I hadn't been there, it wouldn't have happened." Peter shook his head, trying to contain the frustration that was building. "Javier, accidents happen. Do you think I care about a pot of oil? I care about you." Javier remained silent, but Peter noticed the boy's hands trembling slightly as he held the notebook. He sensed there was something deeper, something Javier didn't want to share. He decided to try a different approach. "You've been carrying something alone, haven't you?" Peter asked, his voice softer now. "Something that has nothing to do with the tent. Who is Maria?" The mention of the name made Javier stiffen. He placed the notebook on the table and crossed his arms, as if trying to protect himself. After a few seconds of uncomfortable silence, he finally responded. "My sister," he said, his voice low and trembling. "She took care of me. She was all I had, and I lost her." Peter felt the weight of the boy's words. It wasn't just pain. It was guilt, shame, and an emptiness that no one so young should carry. "What happened to her?" he asked gently. "She left," Javier said, staring at the floor. "We were in trouble, owed money. She said she would figure it out, but she never came back, and I should have done something. I should have gone after her." "You were just a kid," Peter replied. "You couldn't do anything." "But she could," Javier retorted. "And she did. I just messed everything up. I always mess everything up." Peter felt a tightness in his chest. He wanted to hug the boy, but he knew that could push him away even more. Instead, he said, "You didn't lose her, Javier. Not completely. There's still a chance to find her, but you need to let me help." The atmosphere in the room grew heavy after the conversation. Javier held the notebook against his chest as if it were a shield, while Peter watched, trying to find the right words to comfort him. But he knew it was Javier who needed to take the next step. "I don't know if I can go back," the boy suddenly said, breaking the silence. Peter looked at him, confused. "Go back where?" "To the tent," Javier replied. "I don't know if I can face people again." "You don't have to make that decision now," Peter said, trying to relieve the pressure. "But I want you to know the tent is there, and I'm there. Whenever you're ready." Javier didn't respond, but his eyes were filled with emotion. Before Peter could say anything more, Clara entered the room, interrupting the moment. "Sorry to interrupt, but dinner is almost ready. Javier, do you want to eat with the others?" The boy shook his head. "I'll be there soon." Peter stood up, realizing it was his cue to leave. He placed a hand on Javier's shoulder and said, "I'm here, Javier. Whenever you're ready, reach out to me." He began to exit, but before crossing the threshold, he heard Javier whisper, "Thank you." It was almost inaudible, but it carried immense weight. Peter left the shelter with a mix of relief and concern. He knew he had taken an important step by reconnecting with Javier, but he also understood that the boy still had a long journey ahead. As he walked back to the train station, Peter resolved that no matter what happened, he would help Javier find Maria, and more importantly, help him find himself. When Javier decides to open up more about Maria, what will Peter discover about the boy's past? And will finding Maria be as simple as Peter hopes, or will it unearth even deeper secrets?
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments section. It means the world to us and helps the channel grow. Let's dive into the next part of the story.
5 years had passed since Peter found Javier at the shelter in the Bronx. Both their lives had changed significantly. Peter still ran the stand in Brooklyn, but it had become more than just a business. It was now a community space where vulnerable youths found work, meals, and above all, hope. He had expanded the area with tables, coverings, and a small food truck, but he knew that was just the beginning of what he could do. One cold morning, while serving coffee and sandwiches to hurried workers, Peter received an elegant envelope from a delivery man. The man, dressed in a sharp suit, simply said, "This is for you," and disappeared into the crowd before Peter could ask questions. Peter opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a formal letter and a check. He read the letter twice, incredulous. It was a $1 million offer from an anonymous donor to transform the stand into a full-fledged restaurant with the capacity to employ even more youths and expand its operations. "This can't be real," he murmured to himself, holding the check as if it might evaporate. He looked around, expecting someone to emerge and explain. Throughout the day, as the stand continued to buzz with activity, Peter couldn't shake the proposal from his mind. He wondered who could possess such generosity, and more importantly, why. That night, he sat in the small space behind the stand, holding Javier's sketchbook, something he still kept as a memento of their beginnings. "Who is behind this?" he asked the silence, determined to uncover the origin of the unexpected gift. In the following days, Peter began to investigate the origin of the check. He called the law office that signed the letter, but the response was frustrating. The client requested anonymity, they explained. Peter didn't give up. He knew there was something familiar about that gesture. It felt like it came from someone who understood his mission to help. One afternoon, while flipping through old notebooks and records of donations made to the stand, he found a clue. Among the papers was a list of young people who had worked with him over the years, including Javier. Suddenly, something clicked in his mind. He remembered how Javier always used to say, "One day I'll give back." Somehow, Peter decided to reach out to Clara, the social worker from the shelter in the Bronx, to try to find out more about what Javier had been up to. She answered warmly, "Peter, it's good to hear from you." "Clara, I need your help. Do you have any news about Javier?" Clara chuckled softly. Javier. He's doing very well, Peter. In fact, he's studying architecture. He got a scholarship and is making a name for himself." The news left Peter emotional. He always knew Javier had exceptional talent, but hearing that the boy was thriving was more than he could have hoped for. "Do you know where I can find him?" he asked. Clara hesitated before answering. "Actually, he reached out to me recently. He said he wanted to do something special for someone important in his life. I think you should know who that person is." Peter fell silent for a moment, feeling a mixture of joy and disbelief. "Are you saying it was him?" "Peter," Clara said with a smile in her voice, "you should ask him directly." That very night, as Peter was closing up the stand, he heard someone calling his name. He turned and saw Javier standing on the sidewalk, holding a rolled-up drawing tube in one hand and a backpack in the other. The boy, now a young man, looked different. He was taller, more confident, but still had the same spark in his eyes. "Javier!" Peter exclaimed, dropping everything to embrace him. Javier returned the hug, a shy smile on his face. "I heard you received something interesting," Javier said, tilting his head towards the stand. Peter stared at him, incredulous. "Was it you?" Javier shrugged, smiling. "I didn't deliver the check personally, but yes, it was my way of saying thank you." Peter shook his head, still trying to process everything. "But how? How did you get that money?" Javier opened the drawing tube he was carrying and showed a detailed sketch of a modern building, with clean, elegant lines. "I sold this design. A client was interested in it at an exhibition. He paid me much more than I expected. I knew exactly what I wanted to do with the money." Peter ran his fingers over the drawing, impressed. "You did this all on your own?" Javier nodded. "Maria believed in me, and you did too. You both gave me a chance when I thought I was worthless. This is the least I could do." Peter was deeply touched by those words. He remembered the nights when Javier struggled against his own demons, convinced he didn't deserve help. Now, here he was, transformed, giving back in a way Peter never would have imagined. "Javier," Peter said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is more than I could ever ask for. You didn't have to do this." "I did," Javier insisted, "because without you I wouldn't have gotten this far." As they walked together down the sidewalk, Discussing the next steps to turn the stand into a restaurant, Peter couldn't stop smiling. He knew that this gesture was not just a financial gift. It was proof that the cycle of kindness and hope he had started continued to grow. With the restaurant on the brink of becoming a reality, what new challenges awaited Peter and Javier? And would the search for Maria, still an enigmatic figure, finally lead them to the answers they both sought? The sign shone with simplicity and pride, Hope Restaurant, in white letters against a blue background. Located in the heart of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, the restaurant was a reflection of everything Peter had dreamed of. He maintained the essence of the old food stall, but now there were well-set tables, a modern kitchen, and above all, a team made up of vulnerable young people who, like Javier, needed a chance to start over. Peter watched with satisfaction as Devon, who had worked with him since the days of the stall, served a table with renewed confidence. Across the room, Angela, a young woman who had recently left a shelter, organized orders with efficiency. Each face carried stories of overcoming adversity, and Peter knew that the restaurant was not just a business, it was a symbol of transformation. At the counter, a board displayed photos and thank you notes from customers and young people who had passed through. In the center was a picture of Javier holding one of the first drawings he had done for Peter. He still remembered when Javier said, "Maria and you believed in me." That phrase echoed in his mind as he walked through the dining area, greeting customers. That afternoon, during a brief break, Peter sat on one of the benches near the entrance. He opened a notebook where he jotted down ideas to expand the restaurant and help even more young people. His concentration was interrupted when Devon approached him with a letter. "This arrived for you, chef," he said, handing over the envelope. Peter thanked him and opened the envelope with curiosity. Inside was a formal invitation to an architecture exhibition at the MoMA in Manhattan. At the bottom, a handwritten note caught his attention. "Peter, you changed my life. Now I want to show you what that meant. Please come. Javier." On the night of the exhibition, Peter dressed carefully, donning a suit that barely resembled the simple man from the food stall. He arrived at the Museum of Modern Art and was impressed by the grandeur of the venue. The main hall was filled with elegantly dressed people, and the walls displayed stunning models and architectural designs. It was a world completely different from what Peter was used to, but he knew he needed to be there. One of the event curators greeted him. "You're Peter Donovan, right? Javier mentioned you'd be coming." Peter confirmed, feeling a mix of pride and anxiety. He followed the curator to an area dedicated solely to Javier's work. At the center of the exhibit was a detailed model of a building with sleek, modern lines. Next to it, a panel bore the title, "Bridges to the Future." "He said this was inspired by you," the curator commented before stepping away to attend to other guests. Peter approached, admiring every detail of the piece. He knew Javier was talented, but seeing that level of creativity and skill left him speechless. As he observed, he felt a familiar presence beside him. "Do you like it?" a familiar voice asked. Peter turned to see Javier. He looked different, more mature, but still carried the same essence Peter had known years ago. "Javier," Peter said emotionally, "this is incredible. You did all of this?" Javier nodded, a shy smile on his lips. "You gave me a chance. Maria inspired me to dream. This is the result." The two talked for a few minutes, reminiscing about the past and discussing the future. Then Javier, hesitating for a moment, said, "Peter, there's something I need to tell you. Something I discovered recently." Peter furrowed his brow. "What is it?" Javier led him to a private room, away from the buzz of the exhibition. There, on a table, was a photo of a young woman. "This is Maria," Javier said, pointing to the image. Peter took the photo carefully, analyzing the face of the woman who had been such an important figure in Javier's life. She had delicate features and a smile that conveyed a blend of sweetness and determination. "She's alive, Peter," Javier continued. "I found her a few months ago." Peter was shocked. "What? Where is she?" "In the Bronx," Javier replied. "She works at a community library, but Peter—" He paused as if struggling with the words. "She's scared to see me. She thinks she let me down, that she abandoned me when I needed her most." Peter felt a lump in his throat. He knew how much Maria meant to Javier and the impact her disappearance had caused. "Did you go to her?" he asked. "Yes," Javier admitted. "I saw her, but she didn't know it was me. I was frozen, Peter. I was afraid she would reject me." Peter placed a hand on Javier's shoulder. "She's your sister, Javier. If you reach out, she'll understand. And if you need help, I'll be by your side." Javier took a deep breath, clearly relieved to share that secret. "Thank you, Peter. I just need time." The two returned to the exhibition, where Javier was received with praise and compliments from various guests. Peter watched from a distance, proud of the man that the shy boy had become. But deep down, he knew that Javier and Maria's story was far from over. When Javier finally confronts Maria, will she be ready to welcome him? And what secrets about their past are still to come? The exhibition was in full swing when Peter sensed a different kind of movement in the hall. He was standing next to a group of guests, still absorbing Javier's emotional words during his presentation, when he heard a collective gasp. He turned to see Javier walking toward a woman who had just entered. It was Maria. She looked visibly nervous, adjusting her glasses as she scanned the room, as if hoping not to be noticed. But upon meeting Javier's gaze, all her hesitation vanished. Javier took a few steps toward her, his expression shifting from surprise to pure emotion. Without exchanging a word, he embraced her. The hall fell silent. All eyes were on the two of them. Maria began to cry, her arms clinging to Javier as if he might disappear. Tears streamed down the young man's face, too, but he seemed to be trying to stay strong for her. "I'm so sorry," Maria said, her voice low but heavy with guilt. "I never wanted to leave you." "You didn't leave me," Javier interrupted, holding her face in his hands. "You did what you thought was right, and I understood that. I just wanted to see you again." The audience began to applaud, some discreetly wiping tears away. Peter, who was watching from a distance, felt his heart tighten. He knew how much that moment meant to Javier, and how this reconnection could finally heal the wounds of both. When Maria and Javier approached Peter, emotion overtook the three of them. "You must be Peter," Maria said with a shy smile. "I am, and it's a pleasure to finally meet you," Peter replied, shaking her hand. He couldn't help but think about how much Javier had changed because of her. Even in her absence, Maria had always been present in the traits, dreams, and strength that Javier carried. Soon after, everyone gathered again for the official presentation of Javier's work. He took the stage, now visibly calmer but still emotional from Maria's presence. He held the microphone firmly, and behind him was projected a drawing of a building that seemed to soar into the sky. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice steady but filled with feeling. "Before I talk about what this project represents, I need to acknowledge two people. Maria, my sister, and Peter, the man who believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." The audience erupted in applause. Maria, standing next to Peter, covered her face with her hands, clearly overwhelmed. Javier continued, "Maria was my first inspiration. She showed me how beautiful the world can be, even when life is tough. And Peter, well, he was the bridge that connected me to a future I thought didn't exist for someone like me." He paused, looking directly at Peter. "Peter, this project is dedicated to you and Maria. You are the bridges that supported my dreams. Without you, none of this would be possible." Peter tried to hold back tears, but couldn't. He had never imagined that his small acts of kindness could impact someone's life so profoundly. The entire hall was applauding, and for the first time, Peter felt that everything he had done in life truly made sense. Javier then explained the concept behind his work. "This building is not just a structure. It represents connection, hope, and transformation. It's a space where stories like mine can begin and flourish, a place where no one will be left behind." Javier's vision was clear and powerful, and Peter knew he was looking at something much greater than just a building. He was looking at the future. After the presentation, as guests began to disperse around the hall, Maria, Javier, and Peter stayed together, still digesting the emotion of the reunion. Maria held Javier's hand tightly, as if fearing he might disappear again. Peter watched the two, feeling a warm comfort in his chest. For the first time, it seemed like everything was in the right place. "So what happens now?" Peter asked, breaking the silence. Javier smiled, but there was a mix of nervousness and hope in his gaze. "I'm still trying to figure that out," he replied. "Having Maria back, seeing you here, it feels like a part of me that was missing has finally returned." Maria squeezed her brother's hand. "I want to deserve this," she said, looking at Javier and then at Peter. "I wasn't ready to face him before, but now I want to be part of his life again, for real." Javier wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You've always been a part of it, Maria. Always." As the three talked, Javier took a small model from his backpack, something that appeared to have been assembled in a hurry, but still radiated special care in its details. He placed it on a nearby table, capturing Peter and Maria's attention. "This is a project I've been working on," Javier explained. "It's nothing grand yet, but it means a lot to me." The model represented a small community building, with open areas, creative workspaces, and a large central space. I imagined it as a place where young people can explore their creativity, find support, a space to grow without fear. It's the kind of place I wished I had when I was lost. Maria looked at the model with keen interest, her eyes shining with emotion. "This is amazing, Javier. Do you really want to do this?" "I do," he replied firmly. "But I know it will take time. First, I need to graduate, find the right resources, and learn more. Still, it's a dream I want to turn into reality." Peter looked at the project with admiration. "And when you're ready, you know you can count on me," he said. "The restaurant will always be available to help the community, just like it helped you." Maria nodded, smiling for the first time in a long while. "And I want to help too. I don't know how yet, but I want to be a part of this. I want to stand by your side, Javier." That moment wasn't an announcement of something already achieved, but the beginning of a dream that united the three. It was a promise that with patience and determination, they could build something together. Something that reflected not only Javier's journey, but also the impact Peter and Maria had on his life. As Javier, Maria, and Peter dream of a shared future, what obstacles and challenges will arise along the way? Are the wounds of the past truly healed, or are there still hidden truths that need to come to light? The day was sunny when Peter and Javier parked in front of the shelter that had once been the temporary home of the young architect. The building, which had once displayed weathered bricks and windows covered with wood, now shone with a fresh coat of light blue paint. A sign at the entrance read, "Community Center Hope." As they walked through the renovated hallways, Javier could hardly contain his emotions. He pointed out every corner, explaining the changes that had been made. "This was where I slept," he said, stopping in front of a room that now housed shelves full of books and toys. "I never imagined this place could look like this." Peter, beside him, watched everything with admiration. He knew that the Art Institute was still a work in progress, but seeing the shelter already functioning as a community center was proof that the efforts of Javier and so many others were yielding results. In the outdoor area, several children were running around the yard playing while some mothers chatted on newly installed benches. In one corner, a small community garden thrived, filled with tomatoes, herbs, and flowers. Javier paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. "This is it, Peter," he said. "This is the place where everything changed for me, and now it can change the lives of so many other people." Peter placed his hand on Javier's shoulder, smiling. "You did this, kid. You turned something that was pain into hope. Not everyone can do that." Later, the two sat at one of the tables in the yard. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Peter looked at Javier, who was absorbed in watching the children play. He knew that this moment meant more to the young man than any words could express. "Have you thought about everything that has happened to bring us here?" Peter asked, breaking the silence. Javier smiled, but there was a melancholy in his eyes. "Often," he replied. "I remember how I felt when you found me in that tent, lost, alone, and now it feels like everything led to something bigger, like it had a purpose." Peter nodded. "Life has a funny way of surprising us. When I got fired, I thought my life was over. I never imagined that would lead me to meet you, or that it would bring us here." The two fell silent again, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence filled with understanding, where words weren't necessary. Finally, Javier spoke. "You changed my life, Peter. And Maria, even in the toughest moments, she never stopped believing in me. I feel like, in a way, everything we're doing now is because of you two." Peter looked at him, his eyes welling up. "And you changed mine, Javier. You showed me that even in the darkest moments there's always something or someone that can remind us of what truly matters. I am the man I am today because of you." They toasted with glasses of water, a simple gesture but full of meaning. It was more than a celebration. It was a mutual acknowledgement of everything they had overcome together. As Javier and Peter talked, a child approached timidly. He was about 8 years old, wearing a faded yellow shirt and holding a large notebook with a slightly torn cover. Peter noticed the boy's curious gaze as he seemed to hesitate before speaking. "Are you Javier?" the boy asked, pointing at him. Javier smiled. "I am. What's your name?" "Leo," the boy replied. He opened the notebook, revealing drawings made with colored pencils. Despite their simplicity, the lines were detailed, full of life and emotion. "I like to draw. They told me you like it too." Javier carefully took the notebook, flipping through the pages. He saw something familiar there, the desire to express oneself, to create something greater than words could explain. He remembered himself, sitting alone in corners, doodling on old papers, dreaming of a better world. "You're really good, Leo," Javier said, returning the notebook. "Keep drawing. One day you can do amazing things with it." Leo smiled shyly, and before running back to the group of children said something that touched Javier deeply. "I want to be like you." Javier stood still, watching the boy disappear among the others. He looked at Peter, who had a proud smile on his face. "The cycle continues," Peter said. Javier nodded, his eyes shining with emotion. "Yes, and I hope it never stops." As the sun finally disappeared on the horizon, Javier and Peter knew that this moment was more than just the closing of a chapter. It was the beginning of something much larger, a legacy of kindness, resilience, and hope that would continue to inspire generations.
The stories of Peter and Javier teach us something profound. Kindness has the power to transform lives. By following his heart and helping a lost young man, Peter started a chain of change that went beyond what he could have ever imagined. Javier, in turn, shows us that even in the face of adversity, believing in yourself and accepting help can open doors to a brighter future. Maria, with her emotional reunion, reminds us that it is never too late to seek redemption and start anew. Together, they prove that when we support one another, we can create a lasting and inspiring impact. Now, I ask you, in your life, what small act of kindness can you do today that could change someone's tomorrow? And what did you think of this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, like the video, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps the channel grow and lets us bring you more touching stories like this. And don't miss the next video. Just click on the card appearing on the screen. Thank you for watching and for being part of this journey. See you next time.